What if I told you that some of the most gruesome war crimes in history not only went unpunished, but were actively used to fuel some of America's darkest Cold War experiments? Today, we're diving into the disturbing story of Shiro Ishii, Unit 731, and how figures like Richard Helms, Alan Dulles, James Angleton, and Frank Olsen became entangled in a web of war crimes, biological warfare, and secret intelligence operations that still haunt us to this day.
Japan had a long-standing interest in biological weapons. Emperor Hirohito, who had a degree in marine biology, believed that biological weapons would help Japan conquer the world.
This story is not just about history, it's about the dark moral compromises that powerful men made in the pursuit of scientific knowledge and military superiority. What price are we willing to pay for progress? And how did the quest for power overshadow the atrocities committed during World War II?
これを全部殺害して実験にした。この事実、これを私は自分の目で見てます。彼らはどんな思いであの山の中で私は孫悟の丘の上に立って。
Buckle up, because this is a chilling journey into one of the most sinister intersections of science, war, and politics. Let's rewind to the early 20th century and begin with Shiro Ishii, the mastermind behind one of the worst atrocities of World War II. Born in 1892 into a privileged family, Ishii had the makings of a brilliant medical scientist. He was a rising star at Kyoto Imperial University, but his interests quickly turned from saving lives to taking them. Ishii became obsessed with the idea of biological warfare, especially after Japan refused to sign the Geneva Protocol of 1925, which prohibited the use of chemical and biological weapons. This loophole gave Ishii the green light to pursue his dark ambitions.
Thousands of people became test subjects. They were from various nationalities. Around 60% were Chinese, around 30% Russian, and a few Koreans and Mongolians.
Fast forward to the 1930s, and Japan's imperial expansion into Manchuria created the perfect setting for Ishii's vision. Unit 731, officially called the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Bureau, was established in Japanese-occupied Manchuria under the guise of humanitarian work.
Nowadays, most of the buildings of those facilities have largely vanished, but a museum has been erected on the former perimeter to document the extent and the acts of the Japanese Chemical Weapons Unit.
But beneath this innocent title lay something far more horrifying. A sprawling complex dedicated to the most inhumane experiments imaginable. Over the next decade, Unit 731 became a place of unspeakable atrocities. Thousands of men, women, and children, mostly Chinese civilians, but also Korean laborers, Allied prisoners of war, and even infants, were subjected to experiments that defy comprehension.
The Chinese population of Harbin were the equivalent of lab rats. These weren't human beings who had rights to life, who had rights to freedom from torture and sickness and disease.
Picture this: live vivisections where prisoners were dissected without amnesia. Exposure to deadly pathogens like anthrax, plague, and cholera. Freezing experiments where subjects were exposed to sub-zero temperatures until their limbs froze solid, only to be thawed out in scalding water. And the list goes on. The goal? To develop biological weapons that could be used on a massive scale. Plague-infested fleas, anthrax-laden bombs, and poison supplies were all tested on live human subjects, with the ultimate aim of using them in warfare.
恐ろしいようなことしとったからな。
その解剖は生きたままですか？
全部生きとんのさ。切り取って。
It's hard to overstate just how horrific these experiments were. Thousands of people died slow, agonizing deaths as Ishii and his colleagues continued their gruesome work. But here's the chilling part. These experiments were not just acts of cruelty for cruelty's sake. They were part of a calculated effort to perfect biological warfare for future use. And Ishii's ambitions weren't limited to China. There were plans to deploy these weapons against the Allies if the war had continued.
The Allied armed forces have been ordered to suspend offensive action. The proclamation of VJ Day must await upon the formal signing of the surrender terms by Japan.
As World War II came to a close and Japan faced imminent defeat, Ishii ordered the destruction of Unit 731 to cover up the evidence of his war crimes. Prisoners were executed, buildings were blown up, and documents were burned. But despite these efforts, rumors of the atrocities committed at Unit 731 had already begun to spread.
More Japanese war criminals are being rounded up, I'm glad to say. In Saigon, Captain Furukawa, accused of murder and rape, is handcuffed to Colonel Shitsume, who was responsible for the murder of some 400 French prisoners by bayoneting and beheading.
The world expected justice, and Ishii's capture seemed like a guarantee that the perpetrators would be held accountable. But what happened next was a shocking betrayal of that expectation. In January 1946, Ishii was captured by the American Counterintelligence Corps.
I plead guilty to having exercised direct guidance of preparations for conducting biological warfare, chiefly against the Soviet Union. Biological bombs were to be dropped on Vladivostok, Voroshilov, Khabarovsk, Chita, and Blagoveshchensk.
He should have been tried and convicted for his war crimes. Instead, he made a deal with the U.S. government. In exchange for immunity, Ishii offered to hand over all the data from Unit 731's experiments. That's right, the United States, eager to get its hands on the biological warfare research that had been conducted in Manchuria, decided to let Ishii and his colleagues go free. Why?
Russia seems to have plenty of barbed wire to enslave its own people, to keep freedom out.
The U.S. was in the midst of the Cold War and saw the potential value in the horrific experiments Ishii had conducted. Biological warfare was still very much on the table as a tool of modern warfare, and the data Ishii had collected, while obtained through unspeakable means, was seen as a treasure trove of information. Enter Sidney Gottlieb, a name synonymous with some of the most infamous Cold War-era programs.
He was the person who carried out the most intense and extreme experiments on human beings that have ever been conducted by any officer or agency of the U.S. government.
Gottlieb, a biochemist, was the CIA's poisoner-in-chief, leading experiments in mind control, interrogation, and chemical warfare. He would later become infamous for overseeing MKUltra, the CIA's notorious mind control program that experimented on unwitting civilians using LSD, drugs, and psychological torture. Gottlieb, like others in the U.S. intelligence community, saw immense value in Ishii's research.
I was sent to the Allen, which was the psychiatric ward of the Royal Vic. Every time I had the nitrous oxide, I felt like I was spinning.
Unit 731 had provided detailed reports on the effects of various biological agents on human beings, data that would have been impossible to gather ethically or legally in the U.S. But Ishii's data wasn't just confined to biological warfare. His research into poisons, chemical agents, and methods of covert assassination overlapped with what Gottlieb and his team were developing at the CIA. But Gottlieb wasn't working alone. Some of the most powerful men in the U.S. government were involved in this dark chapter, including Richard Helms, Allen Dulles, and James Angleton. Let's take a closer look at these key figures and their roles in shaping America's post-war intelligence apparatus. Richard Helms, who would later become the director of the CIA, was deeply involved in covert operations during the Cold War. He had a reputation for being pragmatic, often prioritizing national security over ethical concerns.
Breaking and entering and not getting caught is a very difficult activity. And for it to be done properly, one has to have trained individuals who do nothing else and who are used to doing this frequently.
Helms played a critical role in overseeing programs like MKUltra, where human experimentation became a routine part of intelligence gathering. It was under Helms' watch that the CIA embraced data from Unit 731, viewing it as a valuable asset in the race to stay ahead of the Soviets. Then there was Allen Dulles, the longest-serving director of the CIA and one of the architects of America's Cold War intelligence strategy. Dulles was obsessed with using any means necessary to defeat the Soviet Union, even if it meant collaborating with some of the most notorious war criminals in history.
The KGB is one of the most sinister organizations that ever was organized.
Are they any good? Are the Russians good at this?
Oh, yes. Oh, my, yes. You take some of their operations, they're classic.
Under his leadership, the CIA not only incorporated Nazi scientists into U.S. military research through Operation Paperclip, but also quietly integrated Shiro Ishii's data into its biological warfare program. Dulles was a master of covert operations and had no qualms about using morally questionable methods if it gave the U.S. an edge. James Jesus Angleton, head of the CIA's counterintelligence division, was another key player. Angleton was a paranoid figure, obsessed with uncovering Soviet spies and rooting out traitors within the U.S. government.
There are those, of course, who would say that the CIA's wings were simply clipped, that they had been going too far, too fast, too freely.
Oh, there are those who will say anything. There is always a question whether a democratic country is capable of having an intelligence service of any great merit.
His hardline stance against communism made him a natural ally in the CIA's willingness to use ethically compromised data. Angleton's involvement in covert operations often blurred the line between intelligence gathering and outright psychological manipulation. But perhaps the most tragic figure in this story is Frank Olsen, a scientist working on biological warfare for the U.S. government.
The Frank Olsen family has lived here in Frederick, Maryland since 1950. Olsen was a top-level biochemist at nearby Fort Detrick.
The U.S. was actively developing biological weapons using data from Unit 731 and other sources, not just for defense, but for potential offensive use. Olsen's disillusionment with the CIA's covert programs grew, particularly as he learned more about the agency's experiments on human subjects. Olsen's story took a dark turn when he was unwittingly dosed with LSD by Sidney Gottlieb during a CIA retreat in 1953.
In 1953, November, Alice Olsen was told simply that her husband had fallen or jumped out of a 10th-story window.
Just days later, Olsen fell to his death from a New York City hotel window in what was officially ruled self-inflicted. However, many, including Olsen's family, believe he was murdered by the CIA because he knew too much about the agency's illegal activities. His death remains shrouded in mystery and serves as a stark reminder of the personal toll these secret programs took on those involved.
One is either asked to believe that in addition to being malicious in many ways, the CIA is very bumbling. But in this case, I think there's another possibility that there may have been some intent.
The legacy of Unit 731, Shiro Ishii, and the involvement of the CIA is a grim one. The U.S. government's decision to prioritize scientific data over justice for war crimes set a dangerous precedent. Thousands of lives were sacrificed for knowledge that, while valuable from a scientific perspective, was obtained through unimaginable cruelty. This ethical compromise had far-reaching consequences.
Logs are not people. They're even lower than livestock, preached Shiro Ishii, the ideologist and mastermind behind everything that happened at the death camp.
The data for Unit 731 became a cornerstone of U.S. biological warfare research, contributing to the development of weapons and strategies that would have been unthinkable under normal circumstances.
Yes, as a lot of people know, Agent Orange is a herbicide that was used most famously in Vietnam.
But the real cost wasn't just the advancement of military science. It was the loss of humanity, the abandonment of morality, and the pursuit of power. As we reflect on this dark chapter in history, we must ask ourselves, how far should we go in the name of progress? Can we ever justify sacrificing human lives for scientific knowledge or national security? The story of Shiro Ishii, Sidney Gottlieb, Richard Helms, Alan Dulles, James Angleton, and Frank Olsen forces us to confront these difficult questions. It serves as a reminder that the pursuit of power, when left unchecked, can lead to unimaginable horrors. If this story left you with more questions than answers, you're not alone. The legacy of Unit 731 and the CIA's Cold War experiments is one that demands reflection, not just on the events of the past, but on the moral choices we face in the present and future. What kind of world do we want to live in, and how much are we willing to sacrifice to create it? These are not just questions for historians. They're questions for all of us as we navigate a world where the lines between morality, science, and power are often blurred. Remember, the past isn't just a series of isolated events. It's a mirror that reflects the decisions we're making today. Should we allow war criminals to escape justice in exchange for the promise of knowledge? Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more explorations into history's untold stories. If you're curious to explore more unsettling truths about the secret operations and decisions that shaped our world, make sure to check out these links, like this one about MKUltra.